Moment, please. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, or good afternoon, or I guess good morning if you are in Europe, because it's already 1 o'clock in the morning there. My name is Katja Sippel, and I'm the executive director of the German American Heritage Foundation and Museum. And this is a first for us. It's not our usual programming area. Normally, we focus on cultural topics, historical issues, but we're just absolutely delighted that there is so much interest in this financial planning webinar, which of course has very much a German focus, a German American focus. And it is my pleasure tonight to invite Andrew Fisher and Andres Pilayevs from Cerity Partners. Cerity Partners is a financial planning and investment company. And Andrew is joining us this evening from San Francisco. He's a partner in Cerity's San Francisco office, where he works as a senior client advisor for a variety of financial planning and wealth management issues. He has an impressive background in assisting international and cross-border families. So, just the topic for tonight. And Andres is a principal in the Reston, Virginia office. So he's a local more or less, but he's originally from Latvia in the Baltics. So he too has an international background, and that's also his focus. He works in cross-border taxation issues. So Andrew and Andres, thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm sure I didn't cover the entire spectrum of your activities, but I want to keep it brief. We have a lot of ground to cover tonight. And thank you so much for being with us this evening. I'm going to hand it over to you now.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Katya. We appreciate you all having us here. And we also enjoyed our discussion of history that we had over the last 15 minutes as we're waiting for this to start. It's so wonderful to be here with everyone. We will be, Andres and I will be giving a presentation of about 35 minutes. We're going to try and hopefully have some time at the end for questions and answers. We ask that you put them into the chat box. Try not to be too individualized because we can't really go into super personal items. Obviously, we are available after the fact. You'll see our emails there, and we're very happy to take your questions and be of help. That's really the goal of this presentation, is to teach you a few things and help you think through where your own future might lie. Very quickly, Cerity Partners is a very large independent wealth management firm. I ran a firm called Worldview Wealth Advisors for 15 years, which I folded into Cerity Partners 4 years ago. We are a very large national firm, but we are fiduciary as well. We charge no commissions. We work solely with the best interests of our clients in mind, managing over 100 billion in assets with around 1,300 colleagues around the country. And when I think about what holistic wealth management is, it is obviously investment advisory work, but brought together with more personalized and holistic financial planning, tax planning, and estate structuring. So my name is Andrew Fisher. I lead a specialized team here at Cerity Partners called the Cross-Border Planning Team. And we have a pretty unique focus. We have clients who are all over the United States and all over the world with some pretty diverse and interesting backgrounds. We love it. And we'll talk a little bit more about who we serve. But first, I'd like to let Andres introduce himself.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Good evening or good afternoon, everyone. We're really excited to be here today for this presentation. My name is Andres Pilayevs. As Katya had mentioned just a little bit ago, I was born in Latvia, and I've lived in the Washington, D.C. area for over 20 years, so majority of my adult life. I got to experience firsthand what this cross-border financial planning, tax planning really means, and what does it mean when you have relatives that live abroad. So I found that it's a very difficult topic to navigate. There's not a lot of good information out there. So I really decided to make a career out of it and help others navigate those same questions. I am a financial planner by trade. I'm a certified financial planner. I hold a master's degree in financial planning from the University of Georgia, and I specialize in any questions that involve cross-border situations. So whether that's having relatives that are abroad or maybe planning to move abroad, taxation in multiple jurisdictions. And today we're going to try to answer some of the common questions that we normally face when we work with clients. So really excited for today's presentations. I'm going to hand it back to Andrew.
Thank you, Andres. First and foremost, what's cross-border families? Who are these people? And I like to define it in this way to make it easy for people to understand. The reality is, of course, many families have elements of gray. They are, multinational. But in essence, what we focus on are Americans who live abroad. We call those outbound. And then foreign-born clients who come into the US. That's a little more than half of what we do. And then there is this third segment, which would be non-resident aliens, foreign people who hold some assets here. One interesting thing is the transitions, the planning to move abroad or the planning to come into the US often are the most interesting areas where you can really, make a big difference. You can really optimize. So let me get right into what our agenda is today. Obviously, we're here to talk about some tips and some traps when contemplating a move away from the US. And there's lots of reasons why people would do that, which I'll get to. But we're going to talk about why people live and how they decide where they would move to, the importance of their US tax status or residency status after having moved abroad, and then some of the major financial implications upon leaving the US. Those would be cross-border tax planning and reporting, the management of financial assets often left behind in the US. Estate tax and wealth transfer are very big issues for our clients, as is a short conversation about expatriation from the US and its consequences. And then we'll have some time for questions and answers. So coming here into motivations, key motivations for leaving. We meet with all kinds of people. When I first started doing this 20 years ago in 2005, it was primarily American expats. And it was often because they were sent abroad for a job opportunity. They worked for a big company and they were sent to run the factory for that big company for a period of time. Maybe they fell in love while they were there and they ended up staying. But these days, we see just the world has become so small. We see all kinds of reasons returning home to be near family, maybe someone who is originally from abroad, seeking a lower cost of living. I had a call with a couple of clients this morning who have recently moved from New York City to Malaga, Spain. Doesn't that sound nice? A foreign retirement destination, maybe around the climate, what have you. A new environment for raising families. This is a new one that we're seeing more and more, or just a lifestyle, or getting away from the US, or having the ability to get away from the US. And importantly, each of these reasons or goals can lead to different financial consequences as well. So it's important to understand why you're leaving, as well as where you're going to go to. And this is an interesting one because it's not always easy to gain residency in a new country, but it has become relatively easy for higher income professionals, people who have some, from financial wealth. But some of the key aspects are looking for a cultural or language, climate, or lifestyle change. Sometimes it's based on an existing citizenship, the citizenship of your birth. Many people are seeking a new residency or citizenship, which they can do through a variety of means. One, looking for special visas focused on either workers or retirees. They can gain citizenship based on descent or ancestry. I met someone who obtained Italian citizenship this way very recently. And then you have a few areas that I'm going to expand on a little bit, including the Golden Visa programs. You hear a lot about Golden Visas. They become very popular, and really effectively, it is an industry of offering access to live in a certain country, um, often based on making an investment in that country. The benefits, of course, are obvious. You have access to a new business environment, a new healthcare system, perhaps a new tax environment, and lifestyle opportunities. Often, the biggest selling points tend to be a safe haven of some kind or tax advantages, right? Now, special tax visas are especially interesting, and we do a lot of work on these. They're often done in tandem with a golden visa. A lot of people think, and really what they are is a program that has a special period of time with a special lower tax rate that applies to these people. A lot of times, a country's looking to bring in knowledge workers or affluent retirees, and this is one way they can draw them in, right? Most of the time, the primary benefit of these special tax regimes is they let wealthy families exclude their foreign sourced income from local taxation for a period of time. That can have huge, not only tax saving benefits, but it can also have large administrative and reporting benefits. Some of the well-known programs you might have heard of are the Spanish Beckham Law and their digital nomad visa, Portugal's NHR program, which ended recently in 2023. The UK's non-dom regime has been very, very popular and long-running program. It's just this year had, or just last year had major changes to the program, vastly simplifying the program. What's interesting is for anyone other than Americans, these can open up an opportunity for a huge offshore, even sometimes tax-free lifestyle, right? If you're British and you move to Spain, how in the Beckham Law, and oh, strangely, all of your financial wealth left Britain and landed in Switzerland, you might be able to use one of these programs to live tax-free. Of course, many countries are eyeing those programs more carefully or more critically these days. But for a US taxpayer, our federal tax system, we tax on a worldwide basis. And so, as such, our federal taxation tends to be our floor. So, a lot of times, these special tax regimes, while they're nice and can be beneficial, they're not nearly so beneficial as they can be for other citizens of other countries who, when they leave that country, they do not need to report back and file taxes. And that's pretty much every other country in the world. So it's critical, I think, to integrate these visa and special tax regimes with a broader immigration, tax, and estate planning, thinking, especially if the person is a U.S. taxpayer and they're going to continue to be subject to U.S. tax. So we're going to walk you through a lot of these, some of the main issues and some financial tips and traps that we hope will help you guys. So you can do eventually you can do what's best for you. So for more on this, I'm going to turn it over to Andres.
Thank you, Andrew. Perfect. Well, the decision to move abroad, it could be really hard or it could be really, really easy. But what can be confusing is often decisions on what to do with your US status. So, for example, if you are a US citizen, it is pretty straightforward. You'll probably want to maintain that status. But if you're not a US citizen, if you're a green card holder or maybe a visa holder, there are a number of questions that come up regarding your connection to the United States. We wanted to pull up this chart in front of you with 4 different options and also discuss all of the pros and cons of each. If you are a US citizen, you're always taxable on your worldwide income. In addition, you have to comply with all of the US regulations and rules regarding reporting of your foreign assets. And if you are a green card holder, you actually have to follow all of the same rules. So you actually are completely taxable on all of your worldwide income, just like a US citizen. You have to comply with all of the same rules. And if you hold your green card long enough, you actually become something that's called a long-term green card holder. If you've held your green card for 8 years out of the last 15 years, you become treated the same exact way as a US citizens in the eyes of the IRS, which means that if you wanted to give up your green card, you'd have to expatriate and go through the same expatriation process as a US citizen, which can be quite costly. So the first tip of the day, if you are a green card holder and if you're considering leaving the United States, it's very important to work with a tax advisor or a tax attorney that understands the intricacies of green card holders moving abroad and keeping an eye on the length of you holding that green card. So 8 years within the last 15 years is really that threshold by which you would want to leave the United States so you're not subject to the exit tax. Anyone who has assets in the United States, whether they're financial assets or real estate, always have to think about the US estate and gift tax regime. So for example, if you're a US citizen, you're currently are actually have a very large exemption amount, which is, as of today, it's almost $14 million that someone can pass to their heirs without those assets being subject to the US estate taxation. As a contrast for somebody who does not have the US citizenship or does not have a US status, if they're non-resident of the United States and they own, let's say, real estate or financial assets here, that exemption amount is only $60,000. So you could see how big of a difference it is. $14 million of exemption versus only $60,000. And anything above that $60,000 value would be subject to taxation. So for those who are leaving the US without retaining any kind of a status, it's very important to make sure that you work with somebody who understands these topics and the estate taxation for non-residents. So that is a trap that we commonly see for non-residents of the US. Andrew, we can move to the next slide. Thank you. Now, when it comes to the cross-border taxation, so something to understand, if you're a US citizen, you're always going to be taxable in the US, and you may or may not owe taxes, but you will always have to file. And you're probably going to become taxable in that foreign country that you move to. Since today's presentation is with the German American Heritage Foundation, we are going to use Germany as an example, but it is really applicable to many, many other countries in the world. In a matter of fact, most countries in the world will have higher tax levels than the United States. Our taxes are actually quite low compared to the rest of the world. So if you're living in that foreign country and you're paying more taxes in that country, you're taxable in your worldwide income, you're probably going to generate some tax credits that will then offset your tax liability in the United States. And at some point, making sure that you're not double taxed, that you're taking full advantage of all of the rules and laws that the United States has and provides for you to not be double taxed is going to be very important. So here's another tip for today is if you are taxable in multiple jurisdictions, we recommend working with a CPA who actually specializes in working with clients with dual residency in multiple countries. As we always like to point out, it's always best to go to a professional who does it day in and day out. The application of these credits can be quite tricky, so it's really good to work with somebody who understands the intricacies of that. Another important topic is the reporting of your foreign assets to the United States. So the United States has a lot of different laws that require you to report your foreign assets, like foreign financial assets, bank accounts, maybe even investment accounts if you have any. The reporting in its own does not cause any additional taxation in the US, but the failure to report can be actually penalized at quite high levels. So that's another reason to work with those tax advisors to make sure that you file all of the right forms. We're listing some of them here. They're required to be filed at various levels of assets. The lowest one is FBAR and FinCEN 114 forms. So if you have any financial foreign bank accounts with a value of $10,000 that reaches the value of $10,000 at any point throughout the year, you will be required to file those forms in the United States. It's very important that you do that. Similarly, foreign inheritance, receiving an inheritance from abroad for a US citizen is not a taxable event. So the United States government actually welcomes you receiving more assets because they know that at some point these assets are going to be taxed in the US. But it is important to file the right forms. So Form 3520, disclosing the receipt of that foreign inheritance is equally important. And failure to disclose that foreign inheritance can also result in a lot of unwelcome taxes. Now, for those who decide to give up their US status and be a non-resident of the United States, non-resident aliens, just maybe citizens of Germany or another country altogether, actually the tax reporting becomes quite simple. For financial accounts specifically, there are some forms that would have to be filed with a custodian, like forms W8BEN, to claim the tax treaty of the country where that person is located. But other than that, the withholdings of taxes in the US is very simple. And actually, the process of maintaining those accounts is quite straightforward. And a matter of fact, we actually have clients who have no connections to the United States. They're foreign citizens, including Germany, but they choose to hold their assets in the United States for a number of reasons. One, our financial system is a lot bigger than most of the other countries. It is fairly safe, and we have a very robust court system. And also, of course, very importantly, the cost of maintaining your financial assets in the United States, the options that you have for investments are always, the costs are lower and the options are a lot broader. And that is the reason that foreigners like the United States financial system for that purposes. And on the right here of this slide, I'm listing a few specific items that are specific to Germany. Whenever we are comparing the United States taxation with the taxation of another country, we typically look at three items. Whether there is an income tax treaty between the United States and that country, an estate tax treaty, and a totalization agreement. So those are the first three things that we will review and look at. And for the United States and Germany relationship, all three of those agreements are in place, which is great news. So the income tax treaty is something that will dictate which country gets to tax what type of income. And for the most part, if you're living in Germany and if you're a tax resident of Germany, most of your income is going to be taxed there. Germany taxes their residents on their worldwide income, and that is pretty much true across the board. Also, something to keep in mind is if you are a US citizen, a lot of the language in the treaty actually does not apply to you. The United States always puts in a savings clause in their tax treaties, which essentially say that if you're a US citizen, active this treaty did not exist at all. And that is their way to make sure that they continue to tax you on the worldwide income in the United States. The estate tax treaty is actually quite unique. There are only 16 of them between the United States and 16 countries. Germany actually happens to be one of them. So for inheritance and estate tax purposes, Andrew is going to talk about that in just a moment, but just a short preview is that treaty does mitigate some of the taxation. It doesn't eliminate it. The taxation on inheritance and gifts in Germany is still pretty strict, but this treaty does help out with that quite a bit. And then the last one is the totalization agreement. And what totalization agreement is, essentially, it's an agreement between two countries that can help you as an individual who works in both countries or have worked in both countries to avoid double Social Security tax. So you only pay Social Security tax to one country, but then also you can combine your work credits for both countries to qualify for your benefits. So if you're spending half of your career in Germany and then you move to the United States or vice versa, or you move back and forth between the countries, as long as you're contributing to one of the systems that will allow you to continue accumulating your credits, that will then qualify you eventually for the German state pension and the United States Social Security, and potentially you will receive both. And a few other items to mention about the treaty is that The German-US tax treaty is quite old. It was written in signed in 1989. There were a few protocols that were signed afterwards, but the main treaty was signed in 1989. And there are some accounts that did not even exist at that time. Like, for example, Roth IRA. It's a type of an account that would not be recognized in Germany as tax-free, while IRAs actually would be recognized. So that's something to keep in mind, that certain types of accounts would not be recognized in Germany if you were to bring them there. And Andrew, we can move to the next slide. Thank you. And then we're going to talk about management of assets that are left behind. For those of you who are US citizens or green card holders, if you are moving abroad, leaving your assets in the United States is always going to be the best solution. It simplifies the reporting. It actually may be the only option for you, because if a US citizen comes into a bank in Germany, a Deutsche Bank, a Sparkasse, you could open a bank account, likely if you're a resident there, but you will have a lot of trouble opening an investment account. And the reason for that is the European Union has similar rules that the United States has in restricting access to certain types of investments. So within Europe, they have their own sets of ETFs that they're called UCITS, and they're available to German citizens, let's say, or citizens of Latvia or citizens of France. But they restrict access to US-based ETFs. And actually, when you have a US passport, you probably may have a hard time even opening such an account. So leaving the assets in the US is typically the best solution. Most of our tax-deferred pre-tax accounts, like 401ks and IRAs, maintain their tax-deferred nature, which is a huge benefit. The taxation in Germany is quite higher than it is in the United States. And if you have an IRA or 401k, that account will not be taxed in Germany until you start taking distributions. So again, it's a huge plus, and it's a great benefit for those that have those accounts if they plan on moving to Germany.
So I think the tip there is to continue to contribute to them and maintain them. And the trap may be to avoid Roth 401ks and other types of Roths.
Exactly. And the contributions to these accounts can also be quite tricky. So maybe a trap there is that if you live in Germany and if you're paying taxes in Germany, you probably don't want to contribute to your 401k, because what happens is you've paid your taxes in Germany, you've actually reduced all of the tax liability in the US, so you're contributing to that account with your after-tax dollars. And then when you take distributions, you're going to be taxed again. So that's a classic case of double taxation, and that's something that you want to avoid. So that's definitely a trap. Now, I'm going to briefly cover the real estate portion. We love real estate. It's a great asset. In the United States, our system is designed to make real estate investments very attractive. There are a number of deductions that you can receive, like the depreciation deduction and for other expenses. But something to keep in mind there is when you move to another country, the question is, what do you do with that real estate? If it's your primary property, should you sell it? Should you rent it? Well, that rental income may become taxable in the country of your residence, and it may be taxable at a lot higher rates. So that's a consideration number one. The other big consideration is the deduction on your primary property for your capital gains. So in the United States, for a married couple, you actually get an exemption of $500,000 of capital gain when you sell your primary residence. And if you rent your property for more than 3 years, you lose that. So that's a negative. So if you're moving abroad, you probably would want to sell that property within the 3 years. But importantly, if you move to a country like Germany, there they have a whole set of other rules. And I'm not going to get into the details of it, but in short, one of them, it has something to do with rental properties and speculation tax on those rental properties. So if you sell a rental property within 10 years, all of the gain in Germany would be taxed as earned income, can be as high of a tax as 45%. So you could see that the mismatch in the taxation in two countries and the deductions that you receive in two countries very often do not align. So a lot of consideration needs to be given to that. And then lastly, when it comes to banking relationships and bank accounts, we strongly recommend maintaining those when you move abroad and live abroad. Often it's very difficult to start that relationship with a US banking institution. Maintaining your credit cards is always important. So we're big proponents of maintaining that US presence. So you would have the ease of access when maybe you decide to come back to the US or maybe when you're visiting. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Andrew.
Unmute. Great job, Andres. For this webinar, we trade off often, and Andres took the heavier load. So thank you for that. Okay, well, we're kind of on the downhill side here, and my job is to talk a little bit about estate planning. Estate planning has become a bigger topic lately, and it's interesting because it's always complex, and it generally involves both organizing your affairs for what you want to happen should you become incapacitated or pass away, as well as where you want your assets to go upon your death. Of course, things get more complicated when your affairs are across multiple countries, right? So, like income tax, the US estate tax or estate laws will apply to all U.S. citizens and green card holders, no matter where in the world they live, right? What I wanted to provide you here to start with is just a quick overview of the different wealth transfer systems around the world. Every country has their own system, laws of succession or forced heirship, their probate process within the courts, and of course, there are costs as well as taxes on an estate. So this is a simplified view that just simply shows that, as an example, the US and the UK have a tax that's levied on the estate. So someone passes away, and there's a tax that's applied to the estate before it's then distributed to the beneficiaries. Most European countries, in the contrary, have a tax on the person inheriting something. So if the person passes away and leaves it to their three kids, each of the kids individually have a tax on what they've inherited. Now, most countries have rules to catch an estate. For example, when a German citizen leaves their estate to a non-German person, well, of course, their laws are smart enough to capture that and still tax it the same way they would to a beneficiary who happened to be a German. And you can see on the far right that there are many countries that don't tax an estate at all. The US exemption is currently 13.99 million per person for 2025, so nearly $28 million combined for a couple. It's set to sunset in January of 26. And at that time, if the laws don't change, would move to somewhere in the $5 to $7 million per person. Recent rumors I heard as of yesterday are that the Trump administration is looking to extend the current levels for 5 more years, a five more extension. So we'll see how that goes. Obviously, those exemption amounts are quite high relative to other countries around the world. So with this slide, we want to give you some good kind of tips and traps. All of these are tips, really. So really, on the left, we want to get people organized on what the key questions to ask themselves as it relates to their own estate plan. Firstly, it's critical to know where your assets are domiciled, or where you're domiciled, excuse me. Where you're resident is generally the rules that would apply to your worldwide estate. Now, obviously, a US person is always going to have the floor of the US rules applied to them. And of course, there are estate tax treaties which work to simplify or organize the way the two countries speak to one another. However, there are very few. In fact, there are only 16. And so for all the other countries out there, it's quite a lot of gray area as to how these estate planning and estate tax rules will apply. But number two, where is the situs of your assets, which is to say, where are they located? Because generally, assets, the rules that govern the distribution of an asset on a person's death are generally the country where that asset is sitting. So, as I said earlier, is there a state tax and a state tax treaty with the U.S. wherever you are domiciled upon your death? And when there is not one, there are a lot of gray, and often one country's rules will apply to the assets in that country, and another country's rules will apply, and it can be really, really tricky and expensive and take a long time to settle estates. Are there any requirements for transfers to certain family members, like forced succession, forced heirship? And then what are the costs? Both any taxes as well as any probate costs, court fees, and what have you. They can be very expensive in some parts of the world. So on the right, we have some ideas on getting prepared, right? You still need to have the proper documentation and procedures in place in every country where you have assets. You may be dual citizen, German and American, have a lot of financial assets in the US. You may have a few properties and some cash in Germany, and perhaps a home in Mallorca, right? And all three of those countries are going to be involved, even though if you pass away in Germany, their rules are going to sort of lead the process. We recommend people have a will or some instruction in every country where they have assets, and that they do their very best to make sure they are in harmony so that you don't have one document that conflicts with the instruction in another document. We'll often recommend people have, let's say, a US will have an official translation and keep that translation with their German will, as an example. The US is very trust happy. And generally speaking, much of these sophisticated estate plans in the US are bad most everywhere outside of the US. And this can even mean the most simple living trusts that pretty much everyone is recommended to create to manage their own estate. Very often, those can lead to, at best, they can be useless because US probate is secondary to the probate process in Germany. Uh, but at their worst, they can also lead to very punitive tax treatment. So it's important also, so we recommend people avoid those, as well as other sophisticated structures like irrevocable trusts and those sorts of things, if you know you're going to pass away living abroad. It's really important to understand the estate settlement process in every country as best as you can. Very often, it's gray and it's hard to actually understand. So when we have a client, let's say, that passed. I had this last year, a client who passed away actually 2 years ago in Paris. And I told the heirs and the family, expect at least 2 years. We have to go through the whole French process. We have to do the US process, but it has to wait for the French process to play out and then the US process. And here we are now, about 2 years later, and we're just about finished. Lastly, we do recommend that you use country experts, but it can be a real challenge getting those country experts to speak with one another and to truly understand the laws in the other country that's at play. And so it's just an ongoing challenge that we have. Okay, so this is a unique slide to Germany. Just a couple of tips that I want to run through very quickly. Not that all of you are Germany or that you're all planning to retire to Germany. We know that you're not. But Germany does have some forced heirship rules. I believe it's on half of the value of one's estate, although I'm not certain. They have an inheritance and gift tax exposure when the deceased is a German tax resident or when the beneficiary is a German tax resident, as well as on all assets located in Germany, even if the owner has no other connection to Germany. Their inheritance tax rates can range anywhere from 7% to as high as a very steep 50% on the value of the transfer, depending on who that transfer goes to. And finally, U.S. revocable and irrevocable trusts can be punitively treated. Andres was telling me before the call an experience he's had where having assets in a U.S. trust ended up resulting in a pretty significant punitive tax outcome for the client. So, lastly, I want to finish this presentation talking about expatriation because it is ending one's legal connection as a citizen with the U.S. And we would not say that this is common. It is somewhat common that we go through sort of a hypothetical process to evaluate what the impact or the ramifications would be to expatriation, but rarely is it done. But expatriating means severing your ties to the US. There's an administrative legal process as well as often a tax outcome, a fee. So who does this qualify for? Who must expatriate in order to give up their US status? Obviously, citizens of the US and long-term green card holders. We call those covered expatriates or covered persons. And as Andres alluded to earlier, it's often because they've had their green card in more than 7 years, or in at least 8 years of the preceding 15 years. It can also happen involuntarily. I see we're at 42 minutes, so I'm going to speed this up. It can happen. You can lose a green card that you've had for many years, even involuntarily, in an airport somewhere at a customs, and this can all apply to you. So, what's the potential cost of that? It's called the exit tax, and it's essentially a fee for the privilege of giving up your US citizenship. It really applies to relatively high income people over the preceding 5 years, or to people with a net worth of $2 million and above. It's basically simplistically a deemed distribution or a deemed sale of all of one's assets subject to a $900,000 exemption. And then the related tax as if you were assumed to have sold, your residence that had a large gain and a stock portfolio and other things. So for a lot of people, it can be not that significant. It really depends on the value of your estate and how much you have in unrealized gain, often on securities and real estate, potentially a business. So I want to end with some pros and cons of expatriation, and then we'll wrap things up. Some of the benefits, obviously, is you avoid the annual reporting requirement back to the US and back to the IRS. You avoid any potential for double taxation because there is some potential. You preserve the option, for example, to live in a much lower tax environment or even a tax haven, even a no tax environment. Remember, I mentioned Malta earlier. And you also improve your ability to interact with non-US financial institutions. Some of the negatives are you lose unrestricted access to the United States. You potentially have a large exit tax. And then you have some of the biggest negatives are on wealth transfer because you lose the ability to have your US estate tax exemption, which, depending on where you might live, you would always have that as an option to take advantage of potentially. And then there's a very onerous tax on any US citizen heirs that you might leave assets to. So, very often, having US citizen children will often immediately preclude a wealthy person from expatriation. This idea of giving up access to the US has a pretty big picture. It's a pretty complex and important financial decision. Most of our clients enjoy the fact that they're multicultural, multinational, and they enjoy their ability to move around the world. Many people feel that having EU citizenship and US citizenship, like Andres, my friend Andres, is kind of the killer app where you can really be anywhere in the world you want for career opportunities, or what have you. So hopefully, in close, we can tell you all that, we believe that the goals and the personal decisions around family, around where one wants to be, are what ought to drive many of these decisions. And then they all have downstream uh, uh, implications to immigration, investing, taxation, and especially at the end of one's life, estate planning and wealth transfer. So we like our clients to be clear about why they're doing things. And then our goal is really just to help them think through the implications, optimize as much as possible. And if they can't be optimized, at least understand, what the decisions around moving around the world, how it will affect them financially. So thank you all for your attention. And Andres and I think we did a pretty good job. I show 47 minutes. Okay, we didn't do that good.
You did very well. Thank you so much, Andrew and Andres. We do have a few questions from our viewers. There is a question from Sharada Strassmore. Can you expand on what it means to move an account? For example, a Roth IRA or an IRA. Would one pull money over as the distribution happens?
Yeah, maybe I'll take that one. It's a good question. So typically, you wouldn't want to just pull the money out of IRAs or Roth IRAs unless you're taking a distribution. And in any cross-border environment, you just need to consider the implications of that distribution in another country. That taxation in another country, for example, countries like France or Germany or the UK or even Spain, may have a lot more significant effect than it is in the United States. So very often we have these conversations with our clients, especially before they move. Ideally, we want to meet them before they move, so then we can talk about these implications and maybe expedite some of the distributions prior to their move, so then they can take advantage of the U.S. lower tax rates. But for the most part, when it comes to maintaining that tax deferred status, you actually wouldn't want to pull the funds out of a traditional IRA because those are typically not going to be taxable in most places in the world.
And just to add to the Roth IRA issue, it's true that if you built up a good sized Roth and then moved to Germany, they're going to look to tax that account. It doesn't mean, however, that you should distribute it because one never knows. You might end up it's in the UK who does respect the tax-free properties of a Roth or back in the US. So there's no sense in emptying that account.
Thank you so much. We have another question. This time it's about totalization. And the question revolves around receiving both US Social Security and a German pension. And the question is, will it be taxed either in Germany or US as a total combined sum and in the country you reside in?
Yeah, maybe I'll take that one as well, Andrew, because I just had to deal with this for one of our clients. And when it comes to German pension, there are really three types of pension that you can have in Germany, which is a state pension, which is similar to our Social Security. That's called Pillar 1. Pillar 2 is normally an employer-sponsored pension. And then there is a Pillar 3, which is more of a private pension. All those can have different types of taxations. I would say that it really depends on what your status is in the United States, whether you're tax resident here and whether you're tax resident in Germany. But in short, the tax treaty does address those, whether it's a periodic payment that you receive as a monthly benefit or it's a lump sum payment. For the most part, most of it is going to be taxed if you are a US citizen in the US. But under the treaty, there are certain types of, especially Pillar 1 pension, the Social Security pension, that may not be taxed in the US. Now, a very important point to mention here, up until about a month ago, we had something in place that was called a wealth elimination provision here in the United States. It's been around since 1983, and it prevented some of the double dipping of multiple benefits, whether it's a foreign pension and US Social Security or US railroad retirement pension and US Social Security, where the US Social Security was reduced by a certain amount to make sure that these benefits were not double paid. Well, it was actually just eliminated in December of 2024. So it's a brand new development. So those of you who are receiving both benefits, a US Social Security and maybe a foreign pension, you will see an increase in your US Social Security up to an amount of $500 a month. So it's actually quite significant that now actually allows for you to receive these two benefits at the same time.
Thank you. And then we have another question, and this one is about long-term care. So, how does one go about researching options to find out about long-term care? What will it cost? Where can one get assistance, etc.?
Andrew, you have some experience with that.
This is a really difficult challenge everywhere. Obviously, even just in not in a cross-border concept, but even just in the US. And people look to these long-term care insurance policies as the answer, and often they are not, right? I mean, you're engaging with an insurance company to provide for your to cover those expenses later in life, but of course, as we know, it can sometimes be difficult for them to authorize those payments. There's also exclusion periods before that insurance kicks in, and there are limits on the amount that they will provide. So, and then the last thing I've seen people pay into long-term care insurance policies for many, many years, only to have the insurer drop them just at the point where they get close to needing it. So as far as whether there's a long-term care policy answer that could be more global and follow you around the world, I'm not aware of anything like that. I think it's an especially unique problem in the US because of the cost of care at end of life here is so, our system is so broken that it is exorbitant. And I don't think you see that in many other places around the world, certainly not if it's universal health care. So I don't have a great answer for that. I will say that many of our clients, we recommend that they self-insure, and we often will look at the value of their real estate and their residence toward the end of their life as sort of like their pool of wealth that can be sold and used to buy into an assisted living facility or to provide for their care at the end of life. So I didn't really answer the question, but it's a tough challenge everywhere, but probably most notably here.
And it probably also varies significantly from country to country. The lady says that she's specifically interested in Europe, but again, Europe is a collection of different countries with individual national laws and different healthcare systems. So
Well,
I'm
and,
not
and
sure
one
that.
thing I'll say, which is so interesting about, let's say, someone who has retired abroad, but who is a US citizen as well, is it's not uncommon for us to see those people activate their Medicare and enjoy some US healthcare when they think they need it, right?
Mhm,
Because
mhm,
there are some places, I'll use Spain as an example. I have a client that was there that was battling cancer, and he'd come home for treatments in the US. And so, in a way, had the benefit of both systems,
mhm.
right?
Well, we have two more questions. Excuse me. One question from Frank Keller. After how many days or months of living abroad is one considered a tax resident? Is there a simple answer, or is the answer again, it depends?
I I hate to keep repeating that, but it does depend. In general, though, I could give you some guidelines. If you spend more than 6 months living in any particular country, 183 days out of the year, you will typically, this is a black and white line that will say that yes, now you're becoming fully taxable. But many countries, Germany in particular, will actually look at other factors. They look at something that's called the center of vital interest. So, as an example, I had a client who was a German citizen who moved back to Germany after spending several decades here in the United States and retiring. And in their case, they sold their home in the US, they moved to Germany, bought a new home, and enrolled their child into a local school. So, in the eyes of German local authorities, they viewed it as that was them making a move from one country to another, and they became taxable there right away from day one. So each situation can be quite different, but in most of the time, that is a very important question. That is one question that we probably spend the most amount of time on, is if somebody is spending time in both countries, how do I not become taxable there accidentally
Mhm.
and then become paying taxes there?
Yeah, in the last week, I've met with two clients who are one of them is in Madrid and one of them is in Paris, both of them being very deliberate about the days they're there to make sure that they're not becoming a resident of Spain or France. Obviously, we recommend that they seek out an expert, a French or a Spanish tax expert to help. I mean, we know about the bright line of spending more than 6 months there. But it's a good just the same way if you're looking to navigate, let's say California, exiting California tax net, it's a good idea to have a California tax advisor who can guide you through some of those steps. So
Thank you. And then the last question, can you recommend any resources, any books to get a better grasp on taxation issues for dual citizens before scheduling a call with you, with one of you? And this is regarding US EU.
I'm gonna let Andrew take that one.
well,
Yes.
I'm gonna I don't have a picture of it right here, but I will put up on my screen so I did write a book on this subject, and it is on Amazon, and I'll share it with you. It's really more of a cross-border financial planning for dummies. Am I? I'm not sharing this. I'll share this. So hopefully you can all see. The Cross-Border Family Wealth Guide is a book I wrote some years ago that really discusses cross-border tax planning, investing, real estate, and retirement. It's a good inexpensive resource. Looks like $24 these days. But there really aren't a lot of great other resources. Um, Andres, do you have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think your book would be a first good step. Also on our website, on Cerity Partners website, under Insights, we have many articles that go into detail on specifics. For example, taxation of IRAs and Roth IRAs. We have an article on that, or for foreign citizens moving to the United States. So we do have a few more white papers and articles that you could read as well.
Yeah. And I think
So
lastly,
definitely.
I would say that if you start to hone in on the country that you have in mind, is it Spain, is it Germany, then you can start doing a little more specific research because you'll often find some guides, an American moving to Spain, American moving to Germany. And then we are a big believer, we're wealth advisors who we help build a team of people, which often includes tax advisors and estate planning attorneys. But we do think we do value specialists. And so this is an area, obviously it depends upon your wealth and your age, but we do believe very much in seeking out expert advice specific to, for example, an American in Germany. And it does exist. It's sometimes hard to find, but it does exist. And that's the type of team that we'll often build together. Andres and I are working with a new clients that retired in near Wellington, New Zealand. And so we are meeting with their tax advisor who understands the U.S. quite well, and that's the kind of thing we do because we do think it's really really important. We're generalists, but to get very specific once you know where you're going to go.
Thank you. And we did have one last question that came in. It's about dual citizenship. Does dual citizenship generally complicate things, make them easier, or does it not really matter? Is it just different?
I'll probably take that one. So uh, Katya, uh, and Christian, actually, thank you to both of them. They helped us publish our article on the subject of dual US and German citizenship in the latest ambassador newsletter for the German American Heritage Foundation. And that is a very timely article as well, because Germany has just announced that now they're starting to allow dual citizenship, which was not allowed for prior to this. So now US citizens can apply for German citizenship. And there are, of course, some pros and cons, but I would say, to generalize it, for most other countries, having another citizenship of another country, very rarely does it have any negative consequences. Because with most other countries, you are able to leave that country and not have any other ties attached, unlike the United States. United States is really the exception from the rule. Anything to add to that, Andrew?
No, I would agree totally. I think, as it relates to any of you in your personal situation, you see our emails there below. Katya could also, make an introduction, but we always like to give a free consultation. We'll spend an hour with any of you to talk about your specific situation. We grow, we do well by, we believe, by helping others, and it always comes back to us. So we just appreciate being invited to speak to this great organization.
Thank you so much to both of you, Andres and Andrew. Thank you for taking the time to walk us through, to talk us through such complex topics, from cross-border taxation, management of assets in the US, and of course, international wealth transfer. And you, dear listeners, dear viewers, if you enjoyed this, please sign up for our email subscription list if you haven't done so already, and perhaps even consider becoming a member. We are always delighted to be in touch with the German American community. You don't have to be German American to join us. And hopefully, this is the start of a new collaboration. You said yesterday, Andrew, that you gave a presentation to the German American Business Association, right, in California some 13 years ago, I believe it was in 2012. And it's been an annual thing ever since.
They keep asking me back, so we keep thinking of new things to talk about. So
Well,
we definitely appreciate it.
we would be honored if you consider such a relationship with us as well. And as we can see, there is significant interest out there, and we represent a growing audience across the United States and also in some other countries as well. So hopefully, we will see you again.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending.
Thank
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Katya and Christian.
Thank you. Have a
Mhm.
great night.
Thank you.